Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One-Year Bible. My name's Stephen Mizell, and today Jay Rivenbark and I are joined by Wendy Korbusieski, and we're looking at the last two churches that Jesus speaks to in the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 22. And we talk about Philadelphia and Laodicea. We talk about the difference between faithful endurance and lukewarm religion. We're going to talk about how we can recover our spiritual fervor, and the modern church can do that. We also talk about maybe some open doors that we miss, easy to overlook in our life, that would be an opportunity for us to pay attention. So I hope you get your Bible and pen and paper, and let's study the Word of God together. Hey everyone, we're back in the book of Revelation today. Chapter 3, verses 7 through 22. And it is Philadelphia and Laodicea, the churches he's speaking to. And he is commending Philadelphia for their faithful endurance, but he rebukes Laodicea for their lukewarm complacency. And I think these two churches are kind of a contrast between a surrendered devotion and what spiritual apathy looks like. Was there a verse or a concept that maybe I didn't write a question about that you want to make sure we cover before we get into our conversation?
For me, I think coasting along is dangerous. It feels fine in the moment because it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't feel like it costs you anything, but ultimately, eternally, it will. And oftentimes you don't realize that until it's too late. But seeking God's correction and receiving it is a gift, and it's proof. That discipline is proof of His love for you. You just need to receive it as that.
Yeah, for me, it was the reminder that even for a church or churches, that God opens doors that people can't close, and He can close things that people can't open. And open doors are to me are always time sensitive, and there needs to be a focus and obedience. And so one of the things he commends the Church of Philadelphia about for obeying his command to persevere and obeying his word and not denying him. Those things all are connected together.
Yeah, so you talked about timeliness for opportunity. The way I've heard it said is the opportunity of a lifetime is only as good as the lifetime of the opportunity.
Yeah.
There's a window.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never read this passage without knowing that is where the name of this church came from, was from this particular verse that was the theme verse when they first started the church, that God will open a door that no man can shut. And they believed it to be an opportunity. And so I'm always reminded of that. And, I do think I think we have to recognize it as a divine opportunity, that it's not doors we open, doors that God opens for us. And I think that's important for us to understand. The verse 80 says, I know all the things you do, and I've opened a door for you that no one can close. The first question that I wanted to discuss is the kind of the distinguishing factor between these two churches. What distinguishes faithful endurance from lukewarm religion?
I think verses 8 and 10 kind of point directly to the answer to that, and it was their obedience. I mean, repeatedly, God is speaking into Philadelphia's obedience. You obeyed my command, versus what he was calling out Laodicea is their self-reliance. They didn't need him anymore. Walking in obedience versus that self-reliance. Obedience is going to win hands down every time.
One seems to be very intentional about what they're doing, how they're doing. The other one is kind of incidental. It's just whatever comes. We're just coasting along, going with the flow. if it happens, it happens. If it don't, it don't. We're just kind of existing.
Yeah, I think of in terms, and for whatever reason, this whole concept has been, it probably should have been my word for the year, that concept of endurance. But I've talked about it a lot. We did a message on it at our intentional conference. But faithfulness is measured by endurance, not ease. Faithfulness is not about ease.
Mm-mm.
Sometimes it is ease, but that's not how it's measured. Faithfulness is the ability to depend on something even when it's not easy. And I think their perseverance at Philadelphia earned them an opportunity. Whereas lukewarmness is probably self-sufficiency, right? Their wealth dulled their dependence on God. And he's trying to renew their hunger. Because, I think, it's when we stand in an altar and we make up a marriage vow, for better or for worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. It includes the good times, right? But it also includes the bad times. And the thing that builds confidence in your relationship is not that they stuck with you in the good times. The confidence it builds is they stuck with you in the bad times, when it was difficult to do. And I think good times have a tendency to dull our dependence. I think that's the danger of prosperity of any kind.
Yes.
And when I say prosperity, I don't mean just financial prosperity. I mean physical prosperity, reputational prosperity, all of those things. Anywhere there's an abundance of something, it can dull our senses and we can become I'll give you an example. My wife's probably going to kill me for this because she watches. But it is true, and I can relate. I just don't verbalize it sometimes. So I travel enough, and I have a Delta credit card. So for the most part, I'm going to get an upgrade if there are seats available. And often I'll get bumped to first class. It don't cost me anything. But the last 2 or 3 times that we flew, we didn't get bumped up. She's like, you spoil me. Like I'm ruined, and so it became miserable, even though it was a privilege to go wherever we were going. Right. It's just like, now I got to sit beside somebody, kind of thing. And it does, prosperity does dull our senses, has a tendency to make us less willing to endure it's small inconveniences, right? Because I can remember a time where it was just a privilege to be able to go somewhere. And I think that the church finds themselves in that spot often. They experience a good season, then we go through a bad season. Like, this is it's too much,
too hard
effort.
Yeah.
And I think it's the endurance that allows us to separate ourselves. So in the modern church, how do we recover our spiritual fervor? What does that look like?
I was really drawn to that section there in starting there in verse 17, where I think he's really calling out the church there to kind of seek some self-awareness of their true spiritual condition apart from God. And I think that's where the modern church can kind of rekindle their spiritual fervor, when they seek some self-awareness about their spiritual condition. I mean, because if you're looking at the things, he calls them miserable and poor and blind and naked. And then he's asking them to, you need to come buy purified gold from me and ointment for your eyes from me and white garments from me. So it's seeking sanctification and asking for wisdom and discernment and regular repentance and daily prayer, which I feel like all of these things are kind of symbolizing, that nakedness and the blindness and that miserable, poor spirit can all be reflected in these habits if there's some self-awareness about your true spiritual condition. So kind of like some inventory, some self-awareness in what your condition is and what it is you need to seek from God, and then ask for it and get it because He's ready to give.
Yeah, he says, be diligent and turn from your indifference. And I think that starts with an awareness. Obviously, this church, he said, you think you're rich, but you're really not. You might have some stuff, even some influence, but the important spiritual things you're lacking in. So there has to be an awareness level, if you're going to turn from indifference and pursue after Him. And then he says, I'm standing at the door and knock. And I don't think I've ever paid attention to this one little word as much as I have in this study. If you hear my voice, the fact is he can be right there, even as a church, and we not hear Him. And I think that's one of the dangers of being indifferent, being content where we are, is we lose the ability to hear His voice, his knock. Because he said, I want to come in, I will come in and share a meal together as friends. He's talking about close, intimate relationship. And obviously he was standing on the outside knocking of what's supposed to be his church here. And he was saying, if you hear my voice, and that takes intentionality. Obviously there were distractions, and perhaps it was the success and things they'd accomplished in the past that got them off focus, and even to the point, either they weren't listening or they were so distracted by the noise that they couldn't hear. He said, but if you will hear, he said, then there's something closer and better and more intimate here available if you want it.
For me, it's striking the imagery in both churches of the door. So in the church of Philadelphia, there seems to be this divine, Jesus is opening the door and closing the door, and they're following along behind Him. In Laodicea, it appears that they have erected a door and closed it themselves and shut Him out. And I think we erect doors, we close doors at times, not intentionally. I don't think that was, maybe, it may be a divine door. I don't know. Maybe it was a door that He shut, or maybe he opened the door. I don't know. I've tried to correlate the two. How they got behind a door when the other church He was opening and closing doors. Maybe He opened the door and they didn't walk through it, and He walked through it. So now He's on one side of the door and they're on the other. And He's knocking, saying, hey, why didn't you come with me? I don't know. I'm trying to understand the imagery, but clearly there is a door between them where on the other side, they were always on the same side of the door with Jesus. And I think that's the challenge that we probably all have to ask, is am I on the right side of the door? Because if we're on the wrong side of the door, we are concerned about opening it. Who is on the other side? Is this the voice of the Lord? But when He's in front of us and He's always the one opening and shutting, I wonder if they just missed an opportunity. Like, did He go on through a door and they didn't walk through in time, and He closed it, and now He's on the other side asking them, let me in. Is the door one way? Right? Does when the opportunity closes, it's up to them to open it? I don't know. That, like I said, there's a lot of imagery here that we can speculate on, but I do think that we can erect or find ourselves on the wrong side of the door. And what I would say is, if He's knocking, we're on the wrong side.
Yeah.
And
sure.
and we don't, It's hard to know. And the thing is, he always wants to get in. The reason he's knocking, it doesn't say the church was knocking. I think about, we were knocking on heaven's doors, but people talk about knocking on heaven's doors. I think more times than not, it's God knocking on our door, and we're not paying attention because I do think sometimes we can be on the outside and we've locked him out, and we don't even realize it. And that's kind of a dangerous place to be. I'm curious, though, as we close, we need to wind this up. What are open doors, do you think, that are easiest to overlook? I'll go first, maybe.
Because I'm thinking in a lot of directions.
I think the easiest one for us to overlook is divine opportunities that God brings people across our path to witness to them or to minister to them.
We make a lot of excuses,
right,
to not turn that knob on that door.
I am probably way more evangelistic right now than I've ever been in my life for a lot of reasons. But I think some of it is I have been challenged up close and personal by some people who are incredible personal evangelists. And I listened last week as John Maxwell was sharing. So I've heard him say this before. I don't know how many thousands of people he leads to Christ in large groups at one time, especially in the corporate world, but there's thousands every year. But he has a personal goal to lead one-on-one 150 people to Christ every year. That's his goal every year, to lead 150 people. And I'm like, that's
almost every other day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So he's telling this, right, at dinner one night. And at the place where we were at, there was an executive that he had become friends with. And she was, the way he described it, he said she was an atheist who became an agnostic. He said, I've been working on her for years. They've been going to this same place for 20 years now, 23 years. And he said, I've been working on her for the last 10 years. Every time I come, we have a meal. I talk to her, we'll ride around and, I'll he said, I don't press it on her. He said, I just, he said a couple of years ago, he has a leadership Bible. And he said, I gave her a leadership Bible. And so by the time he gets to this point in the story, he's weeping. And he said, I saw her today. And he said, she asked me, could we meet tomorrow so that I could show her how to read the Bible? Mm. And he said, by the time we get together for dinner tomorrow night, he said, she's going to know Jesus. Mm. And he can't help himself. That's the first thing he's got to tell when he gets in the room. He said at 4:00 this afternoon, he said, we were riding around on the golf cart. And he said, I'd led her to Jesus, and he said tears running down her face. And he's telling, they had to stop because she wanted to call her daughter and tell her because her daughter was a believer.
Oh, wow.
And he had been planting those seeds for 10 years.
10 years. Mm-hmm.
For me, I look back and think of all the opportunities that I've missed, all the doors that I put up, or the doors he opened and I said, I'm not going through, when it came to opportunities because it was too inconvenient, or I was too nervous, or that's somebody else's job, or I'm not gifted. I got a long list of them.
We've got a lot of them.
What they were. Yeah. I try to be more intentional about it now, but I recognize that for me, that probably is the place that I've closed I think God has opened doors and I have chosen not to walk through, that I wish I could go back and have it over again. I missed some opportunities to lead people to Jesus, or at least to plant some seeds, and I didn't do it. So I don't know, that would be an example. I don't know if y'all have another one of an open door where we might, God has given that we might overlook.
Mine would personally, just for me, just availing myself to people. For a lot of years, I sat behind a desk and was happy to do that because I was comfortable. But not necessarily, I wouldn't consider it evangelism per se, but just making myself more available to people. Just sometimes just to listen, to be there, to be a shoulder if they needed to cry, to be a voice of truth when they needed correction, to be a voice of reason when they needed to come off the ledge, to be a smile when they needed a smile, to see them when they needed to be seen, coming out of my office and being in the room and just availing myself to people. It makes a difference in the lives of other people, and taking advantage of that open door, that opportunity, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of others, which in turn has been for my benefit.
Yeah, it circles back. Yeah. I would say both of those examples would be applicable in other areas, and one would be to be evangelistic through the area of generosity, meaning seeing or sensing opportunities to respond to somebody, ever how small or how large it may have been, and talking myself out of those things for whatever reason. That person thinks I'm after this, or I know too much about them. They got themselves in that situation or whatever. And then that opportunity passes. And when I know when I've missed it because of the conviction that comes after the fact. But those times when you do walk through the open door, it's one of the greatest feelings in the world, that you helped with a practical need. And I think more importantly, it was an open door for plant a seed, people, and invite for them to come to know Jesus too.
Thank you for joining us again today on One Single Story. I just want to remind you that faithfulness thrives in pressure, but lukewarmness dies in comfort. And Jesus is still knocking. And it's our opportunity, it's our privilege to open the door before that moment passes and before it's too late. Hope you'll join us again on the next edition of One Single Story.